And now they all are doing
I'm
it.
going to do my best
But
not
go
to
ahead. Complicate race more.
You're going to have to
Go
go there.
ahead. That's what this rugby could be. Our guest today is Joshua Rubin, who's an academic and a fan of rugby. I mean, he writes about rugby. He's currently a professor of anthropology, visiting assistant professor of anthropology at Colby College, which is in Maine. This is in the far northeast of the United States. And he's the author of this is the reason why he's here, of a 2021 book, Animated by Uncertainty, Rugby and the Performance of History in South Africa. And before this, he was a visiting professor at Bates College, which is also in Maine, up there in the northeast. He went to Michigan, the University of Michigan, where it turns out he also played rugby, and we'll ask him about that in a minute. One coincidence is I arrived at Michigan in 2005.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and spent from 2005 till 2009. I was an assistant professor of African American and African Studies.
Oh, wow.
And communication studies. So on the main campus, yeah, I was working in Michigan. I mean, in the end, my wife did not like Michigan. And I came back to New York City. But I had a great time. I had, like CAS, it was called CAS, right? CAAS.
Yeah.
In the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. In any case, welcome, Josh. Welcome to our program.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
Excellent. So just by way of introduction, if you could just tell us a bit about yourself, and I think obviously you're from the US, we're in the US, and then maybe kind of just get a little bit into why rugby, because rugby obviously wasn't, I'm assuming rugby wasn't, I know the rugby's big in Chicago. I don't know if you're from around there, but I'm kind of assuming that rugby wasn't big. So where did you make contact with rugby or got sort of interested in rugby?
I found rugby in high school. I grew up in Ann Arbor and went to college at Michigan, and the University of Michigan had a well-established rugby team. Some of the alums from that team were coaching at the high school level. They're still coaching in some cases at the high school level many years later. And I came across it because I had a high school classmate who was like half South African, and he was talking about joining the rugby team. And I was like, what is this about? I want to come out and try it. And I was like too bulky for soccer. I always wanted to like body check people when I was playing soccer. And then I played lacrosse as a freshman in high school, but my school didn't have a team. And so I played for the local, like bigger high school until they found out that I didn't go there. And then I was kicked off the team. And so like, I was in this, like, I liked lacrosse. It was pretty fun. I had the skills from years of soccer growing up in the US. And then I tried rugby and I was like, oh my gosh, I get to use my hands rather than my feet. And I get to check people like the way that I always wanted. And yeah, that got me into it. And my coaches, like I said, were associated with the University of Michigan. I ended up going to Michigan. I played rugby for 4 years there. I went to New Zealand in 2005 and played juniors rugby for a year in Wellington, which was an amazing experience with, actually for a summer with two good friends of mine. And like, the questions that you gave me were so great. And I was brainstorming like what it was like being an American kid in the early 2000s, learning about rugby. I saw two versions of the game. I saw the great match, the match between the All Blacks and the Barbarians from like 1960 something, like a VHS of it. And then I saw this great test match between the All Blacks and the Wallabies in 2000, where it was like 5 tries in about 5 minutes kind of thing.
Who was this? Like, who was playing then? Was it like George Gregan and?
Yeah, Gregan. It was like the early days of Tana Umaga, Joe Roth, and Larkham, and like the 2003 World Cup teams. This is like, it was regarded at the time as this like incredible test match, and those were the two ways that I saw rugby. It was like 1960s, like grainy black and white movie that was like handed down through the generations, and then this test match in 2000. And then there was like one online highlight reel that I think a club team from Buffalo had on their website. And like in like 2006 and 2007, my friends and I watched that so many times that they password protected it, because like we were the ones like constantly downloading and watching this video. But it was like Super 12 rugby at the time. That's how we got rugby in the Midwest.
If you had to put the two together and say NFL and rugby, why would you say there's a big difference between the two, and what would you say that's more the one is more contact sport than the other one?
Well, so the thing that I always explain to people, I wonder if you agree with me, is that in football, every yard it's a game of accruing territory, and rugby is a game about possession. You can keep possession like as long as you want. In football, you get 4 downs, and so every impact in football, in addition to the blocking, which is just like an incredibly complicated, like all sorts of opportunities for injuries and stuff like that. But in football, all the impacts are sort of like that because the defense is trying to stop the offense from going forward and the offense is trying to gain as many yards as they can. And in rugby, the goal is to keep possession. So like if you're a defender, I played open side a lot. And one of my favorite things to do was like rip tackle people down. And like, yeah, I would give up like half a meter of territory, but that didn't matter because I was pulling them away from their support. Not to get too technical for, I don't know, your audiences, pulling them away from their support so I could get poach the ball from them. Right. And so like I very rarely found myself in tackling situations where I was like trying to drive somebody back alone. Right. I would often give a little bit of ground to potentially take possession. And I think, frankly, too, that like the padding, like rugby certainly has its fair share of injuries. I don't want to pretend like it doesn't, but like the helmets and the padding, I think it's pretty widely recognized that, yes, it prevents some kinds of injuries, like very, very serious injuries. But people get injured by impacts to helmets all the time. And the pads restrict movements in ways that can result in injuries, too. And so that's sort of my understanding of the difference. It's kind of funny. I played rugby because my dad didn't know what it was. He's a medical doctor. And he was like, I've seen at the university hospital. And he's like, football is the incredibly dangerous sport. I don't want you to play it. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to play this other sport you don't really know anything about. And he went to my games and he was like, he's doing the thing that I told him not to do. Yeah. But I think they came around to it. Like they have a basic understanding of sort of what the game was all about. And I was pretty good at it.
Before I ask about how you got to South Africa, obviously, as David's alluding to, there are some differences, right? And you've explained it's mostly about what possession versus yardage. But there just before we get back, because we want to get to how you get to South Africa.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have noticed that there's more and more NFL players who are ending up in playing rugby union, right? I mean, what do you make of that? This kind of that the Eagles in trying to become more competitive is now beginning to mine this like a much more bigger talent pool that are playing American football.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. As a recruiter for my college team, like looking around campus, trying to bring people in continually to play rugby, football players were often not the best athletes. Like the conditioning was very, very different. Like football is like a quick burst activity with a lot of recovery. And rugby is very, very kind of like methodical, continuous, exhausting. Like the best players I encountered, and this is like pretty general, but like wrestlers often made great rugby players. They didn't have the hand-eye coordination necessarily, but the like body control required and like scrumming was very intuitive, and tackling, and hockey players, honestly, because they have very, very quick feet, good hand-eye coordination, and a lot of stamina. And so I think that basically, like, you've probably heard this, like if Americans ever got interested in rugby and all those football players started to play rugby, how good would the Eagles be? It's not that straightforward, right? Like there are many, many incredibly talented players who are undersized in South Africa, but also across the world. And there's a real ideological problem in American rugby where it's like we want the biggest and the fastest and not necessarily like with the best peripheral vision or the most experience or the best hands. Maybe in the long run, like American rugby would be well served by bringing over athletes from other sports, particularly football. But in the short term, I don't think it's going to give the kind of benefit that people hope for.
I mean, you're right. Like, if you look at South Africa, the way that this is, I know we can see where this is going to go, but he's an undersized, like Cheslin Colby, he's an incredible rugby player, but he's really small. And actually, he was told in the past, you're too small, you can't play wing. But I want to get to how does South Africa come into all of this? You go to New Zealand to play junior rugby.
Yeah.
But at some point, you said you have this friend who's in high school with you, who's half South African. How did the link to go to South Africa start? And I just want to make one other quick point. You had as an undergrad, I understand, written your thesis about playing for your rugby team, like kind of an anthropological,
embedded in anthropologist.
what
Yeah.
people call ethnographic. You did an
Yeah,
ethnographic study of your team.
This is actually a funny story. I never would have put this together without this conversation, but I was writing my undergrad thesis about rugby, and I knew that the readers of my undergrad honors thesis would have no familiarity with rugby at all. And so I wanted to devote maybe like 20 pages at the beginning to like a history of where rugby came from, what it was about. And I met with a professor. I thought in communications, I was directed to them to talk about rugby. And I was like asking for advice about sports and how to write about it. And this person, it could have been you for all I know. This would have been like 2005, 2006.
I arrived. That's literally, this is funny. Yeah.
And this person said to me, when you're telling this history of like global rugby.
Hold on. This person emailed you or you went to their office?
I went to their office.
Wait, did you talk to me?
I don't know who I talked to. It could have been you. It was so long ago. So this person said, when you're telling this history of global rugby, like, don't even bring up South Africa. South Africa's history is so complicated and so political that like you're going to end up writing your whole thesis about it. Like, talk very briefly about South Africa. Don't wade in, basically. Your thesis is about American rugby. You don't want it to be about South Africa. It's too big of a question for you. And like, Sean, maybe you're this way too. When somebody tells you like something is too complicated, you shouldn't study it. That's exactly the thing that makes you want to do it. So I like started reading everything I could find about South African rugby. And I found that there was this interesting like lack of information, I suppose, about like how like anthropologists had not really studied. Some had studied sports, but not a lot of people had studied rugby in South Africa in a scholarly way. And not a lot of people had studied it anthropologically. And so I applied to grad school at Yale to go and live and play in South Africa and sort of learn what rugby was like on the ground in a way that was not particularly common in the literature at that point.
So Josh, I can hear you got a passion for rugby, and there's a lot of South Africans that are playing rugby in the United States that used to play sevens and the 15 game. How do you see the game changing now in America, where they can become a better team, going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately, like I said earlier, my experience has been that U.S. rugby has sort of prioritized quick fixes. Can we put would-be Olympians on the wing, right? Can we replace our flankers and locks with NFL players? And then like, how good would we be, right? Unfortunately, like I played in New Zealand, I saw 7-year-olds who passed better than Eagles players, right? And I saw like in South Africa, I saw like people playing like games of touch, like just anywhere, just like more inventive and a better understanding of the game at like 15 than like players on the U.S. national team. And it, frankly, like really, really bothered me. To this point, in your list of questions, you said, who do I support, the Eagles or Springboks? And I actually thought you meant SV Dia. I didn't. I was like, the Eagles are so far away from my rooting interest that I was like, it must be like Southwestern Districts. It's not like, and so like I wrote in my notes like I support Boland because I thought you were talking about provincial rugby in South Africa, not the Eagles. So like for U.S. rugby to get good, it really has to get younger and younger, and like people have to learn how to pass when they're like 10, right? And I think it's still pretty much the case that like people are learning how to pass when they're like 18, which is like can turn you into a pretty solid rugby player, but not world class, I would say.
Yeah. Sure, you want to ask the question?
You arrive in Pretoria, and I heard before we got on the air, David was sort of fascinated by your choice as to like why Pretoria, but I'm assuming there's some kind of method to your madness, I suppose.
Yeah.
Why Pretoria? Why do you go to Pretoria?
So I did half my research in Stellenbosch and half my research in Pretoria. And Stellenbosch was, so the way that I initially imagined my research was I was going to study sort of like what rugby meant to a post-apartheid Afrikaner identity. And that was kind of in keeping with the literature about Afrikaner nationalism, slow to die, and rugby being this bastion, particularly in certain areas, right, of like white nationalism. And then I got to my field site and I was like, oh, actually, shockingly, these young players care more about strategy and style than they do about nationalism. A 15-year-old kid is not spouting ideology. They're playing rugby. And then I went up with the Bulls, and it turned out that like the Bulls coaching staff were interested in winning games, and they were interested in recruiting the best players. And so I ended up going to like a deeper level of analysis rather than being like, look at these people, how they talk about rugby and nationalism. I started to say like, how does the sport itself carry identity? How does it carry politics? And like, that was very, very, very obvious in and around Stellenbosch because of the mixed racial communities in the area, white wealth in the area, the wine country. And so it was interesting then to watch politics play out on the field, literally.
This is then what your research becomes about, which is you're in this moment in which you decide to study what you like, basically looking at aesthetics, right? As you said, like when you look at it, what else does it say? So what is it that if I'm not a scholar, I'm a fan, and I want to get into also like how fans think about like what are they looking at and like what associations do they make. So if I don't know if we're in an elevator, I tell this to my grad students here.
Yeah.
We're in an elevator and we have, I don't know, like 5 stops, and you have to like, I'm in this elevator with you now. What is this work about?
Yeah.
I'm not a scholar. I'm just a regular person. What are you trying to find? What are you observing, etc.?
Right. So the way that I usually talk about this is when people talk about sports and politics, they often refer to things like demographics of players or flags or anthems or uniforms, right? The Castilian flag and the Catalan flag and like the way that national or regional politics make people care about sports. But what's really funny is when you read those accounts, people often exclude the sport from it. Like there's no football or soccer in people's conversations about like Real Madrid and Barcelona. They're talking about other things and they miss the football that's getting played. And so what was really striking to me is that the research about politics in South African rugby really rarely talked about rugby as an activity, which is a kind of bizarre thing to think, because when people watch rugby, they're watching players do things. They're not just watching flags wave and listening to anthems and things like that. So my research was really about what is this activity that people are doing and how does that make certain kinds of investment, certain kinds of fandom possible? And in South Africa, it's really, really obvious because historically, at least in my analysis, the dominant style of the Springboks and the dominant style of the Bulls and a lot of white, like historically white influential teams has been a kind of like smash mouth, very simple, 9-man or 10-man rugby, right? As you might call it, or makvas as I call it in my in my research. And like there are many other rugby styles in South Africa. In the Western Cape, like people were around me were playing in this very fluid style and they had explanations for that. And so often, like one of my favorite moments in my research was a moment where like half the team was Afrikaner and half the team was colored or mixed race or black by self-identification, could not play together because the Afrikaner players were like, we're going to take the ball and we're going to crash. We're going to do things really simple. And then because of the way that these colored players or these mixed race players or black players approach the game, they would like cut and offload and like it's inspired by New Zealand style. It's inspired by like casual games of touch. It's inspired by previous generations of players. It's inspired by politics, I think, too. Like the team like could not communicate, could not play, and actually ended up fighting with each other in the middle of the game. And so my research is really about like putting the rugby back into conversations about rugby and politics. It's not just bodies with racial identities standing in a row singing an anthem. It's a game that lasts for like 80, 85 minutes and like people are doing things, and that's significant too.
Josh, I want to ask you the question. You've been in South Africa, you went to the Bulls, you had some time in Pretoria, you spent some time with the players and coaches. What do you think makes the Bulls or the way that they play rugby different to any other union in South Africa? What makes them different?
I'm returning to rugby for my current research, which we can talk about later. So I took about 10 years off from thinking about rugby. And I was like, over that time, I was like, maybe I exaggerated it a little bit, get a little anxious about like whether you found a narrative and just ran away with it. And then I was going back to my field notes and I was like, no, I didn't exaggerate it. Not even, I could have actually, if anything, I underplayed it. Like their coaches are like, we want you to be like machines. We want you to be dominant. We want you to face, not space, right? We don't want you to play to space. We want you to smash and then have other people follow up and do extra phases and open up space by drawing in opponents, right? And like that, at least when I was doing my research, was something that coaches deliberately taught players, right? To the detriment of player creativity. Like I talked to players, particularly who came from the Western Cape, who were like, I don't know, I got all these things that I want to do on the field and my coach just wants me to like run a switch, run a set of patterns. But the idea was that those patterns, if you do them perfectly, will march you down the field and get you territory. And then you can sort of like in a Python way, like constrict the other team into your success. I think that's a very particularly influential style among the Bulls, but I also think that like the Springboks have historically carried that style to the national team level too, right? I think I talked to a guy in the Western Cape who was like really annoyed actually that when players were introduced on the broadcast that they were described in terms of their height and weight. He was like, I don't care about their height and weight. I want to know how they can pass. I wonder if they can step, right? This is a mixed race guy.
Yeah.
I know, yeah. And so he was like, isn't it typical of like white South Afrikaner rugby that we get how big they are and we don't know whether they can pass? And like, you look at a guy like Pierce Spies or, Victor Matfield or
that's the man.
Osterrand or whatever. Those guys don't ask them to offload in open play,
In the paper, I think some of the work you did in the book is sort of coming back and being utilized differently in the paper. But to get back to sort of like the kind of question that, people would just ask you, which is that tension where the Bulls are doing this like mark-fast rugby. And I mean, growing up in South Africa, it was on television, like when you watch the Bulls, and it's in the book and in the paper it comes through also, like it's associated with the police. I mean, the Bulls and the apartheid was basically the police and the army. Like that was who played in the Northern Transvaal team with Nas Botha was a cop, like these were cops. It's funny, you're making me think of like Louis, this guy, he had like a beard. He was one of their lock forwards under apartheid. His name will come back to me, but they were all cops. And so in your work, it's like, that's their rugby. The interesting thing is, then you say like when a black player plays out of that style, then it's just magic. So it's like when I watch the Bulls even now, like, and I still watch, you can watch highlights because nowadays you can, in the US, you can just kind of, the highlights on YouTube. The games are on, like, I'm not going to give shout outs to streaming services here because they got to pay us first, but it's on streaming services. And what's interesting is like that thing where you said the explanation they have for what people in maybe in the Western Cape just think is rugby, they call it magic. So like Kanan Moody, probably, who Kanan Moody, the Springbok fullback kind of winger, incredible player.
Yeah.
It's from Paul, like black, whether he's self-identified as black or whether he's colored. But it's like how they explain that kind of energy in a team like that. Whereas I think the Stormers, for everything you want to say about them, is trying to do this other kind of rugby that you're describing that people associate with the Western Cape. And just to finish my point, so when people look at, say, the Springbok team, I feel that tension is always in the Springbok team. If the Springbok team, to my mind, doesn't do well, then they want to revert back to Mark Fuss and massively big white dudes. If they didn't do well, if they blame this. I mean, this is like, if you're on the social media, if you're in the chat rooms or the Facebook comments of SA Rugby or whatever, it's Mani Lebok's fault. Those players are too short. They're playing too loose. We need to go back to basics. And so after they lost to the Wallabies, to Australia in the first test recently, they went back to a mostly white team. I mean, I saw people on social media reacting and going like, hold up, what is this team picture that we're seeing again? And then the rugby came, if you watch that second test that I think they barely won, but they won it seemed, with that Mark-Pass rugby. So that tension, as you're saying, it's not just 15 people, Rainbow Nation on the field, is it Afrikaner nationalism? But it's playing out in other kinds of ways.
Yeah.
In what you're watching, like anybody who knows South African rugby is watching it and kind of making those connections. I mean, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would totally agree. Like a friend sent me a clip. So I've been working on another project, and so I'm not as tapped into like test rugby as I'd like to be. Certainly not in like provincial rugby in South Africa as I'd like to be. A friend sent me a clip of a recent test that I actually happened to miss, where like off the base of a ruck, the scrum half tossed it up and they mauled. The Springboks mauled off a ruck. And I was like, no.
Like a fake. You're talking about the fake line out?
Yeah, but like
Yeah.
off in live play, they formed a mall in live play rather than off a line out. And like I was like, of course, what could be more like warm the heart of like an Afrikaner like rugby fan than watching a mall just happen rather than in a line out, you know? And like I think it keeps being true. And like that return, I think, is exactly right. That like if certain influential people in the institution of South African rugby feel like we're playing too loose, we're playing with too much chance, we're too unpredictable, whatever, our performance isn't matching our aspirations, let's retrench, right, to the kind of rugby that like we know what they define as like proper South African rugby, the rugby that they can count on. Absolutely.
Josh, there's a thing in South Africa where we feel that world rugby is trying to stifle us. Whenever we play well, then all of a sudden they change the rules. They do all these things. I'm saying us, we feel that way. So I'm asking the question, do you think that the way they are making the rules and trying to get other teams to be able to compete with us on an international level is fair? Or should we just, like, we playing the game? Like, you know what I'm saying?
So I can't answer that question without being an academic, I'm afraid. I'm going to do my best
No,
not
go
to
ahead.
make it.
You're going to have to go there.
ahead.
You're going to have to go
Yeah,
there.
yeah. So
we're fans too. We're fans too.
Yeah. So like to me as an academic, I think it's interesting to see how the rules change the game, which then change how people talk about it, right? So like changes to scrum rules, for example, to make the game safer, which in effect ended up kind of limiting the dominance of really powerful forwards, right?
Yeah.
In some contexts, in some countries, probably not as big of an issue. In other countries like South Africa, where forward dominance has historically been quite privileged and quite valued, that rule change can be read as upsetting. So I guess what interests me more is not like whether World Rugby is out to get like South African rugby, but like how stories about identity and nationalism are changed by rule changes because rugby itself changes, you know? And one of the things that I think sets my work maybe apart from some of more popular kind of accounts of South African rugby is like a journalist or a non-rugby, like someone less experienced with rugby will look at the demographics of a rugby team and they'll be like, there's like 8 black players and 7 white players. Is that representative of the racial makeup of the country? That will be like their consideration. Is the team changing in one way or another? But for me, and probably for you, the question is more like, who are those black players, right? Are they ones who play in a Makfa style? Are they the ones that you know are the most creative, the ones most talented, right? And oftentimes, at least historically, it has been players who could be shoehorned into a dominant rugby style. It's not surprising then that a lot of black South Africans were like not super excited about supporting the national team when you're like, this guy is not the best. This guy is like a token wing on the team who will get the ball like once in a game and will be in there for tackling or something like that. Not like the talented fly half that we know from Boland, not a talented fly half we know from the Western Cape who can really do amazing things with the ball. Like they don't want that. They actually don't want that creativity at the highest level in South Africa, if that makes sense.
It's interesting you say that because before you just answered it that way, I actually thought of something that's from the paper where somebody says to you, a black former rugby player, I think you're riffing off what he said about the schools, how, like when you said like, it's not just like, oh, there's a black player, there's a white player, but it turns out that a lot of the black players now also go to the same schools.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if your research, as you said, you took a couple of years off. And one of the things that have happened, I mean, even for myself, I've noticed that how South African rugby, I think, has changed for the better. Not perfect, but if you take it back to say maybe roughly 2007, 2008, you would have noticed like how white the national team was. If you complicate race more, how they went to the same kind of schools, etc. And now we have more players. We have more players of color, but it turns out also they went to the same schools. So that's that thing that you're talking about, which is when you see them at face value, you think, okay, maybe the team should become more diverse. But the point is, and I think that's the sense you get of some of the people you spoke to, is even when the team looks more diverse, the base from where they come is still very narrow. You have to, if you hustle Yankees or the center from the Eastern Cape, I think he was once Rugby Player of the Year.
Lucanio Am.
David the Kanyo Am.
Oh, yeah.
And he gave an interview about this. Like, you still have to go to certain kinds of schools in South Africa for that to work out for you.
Right, absolutely. I mean, like, there's so many reasons why it seemed like even when I was doing my research, like that was the case. Your teams have to be invited to big tournaments, right? Where the scouts go, because the scouts want to scout as many people as possible. And so, like, when I was doing my research, like these Easter festivals in and around Johannesburg, particularly, where like teams were flying in and staying at hostels and hotels at significant expense so that their players could compete against like a team from, let's say, Bishops could play like Monument in the north, you know, when you really wouldn't be able necessarily to do that as consistently. And then the scouts would come from all these major provinces. Or to get in a Craven Week team, you have to be seen. That means that your school has to be one that people are going to see. And scouts have limited time and limited resources. So it's not like purely malicious. It's like these are the readily available pathways for success. And then also things like resources. Do you get lunch? Right? Do you have a gym facility that can make you stronger? These sorts of things are not equitably distributed in South Africa, just like in many other parts of the world. And so, like, if you went to a school and you've got all the talent in the world, but you like don't get a good lunch and you don't get to work out, and your team is never just like on the radar of any scouts, and you're very, very unlikely to make it to Craven Week. You're very, very unlikely to make it to like a junior provincial team. And then like professional aspirations become really, really hard to attain.
So Josh, just a question. You think that it's difficult for a kid in South Africa to play at just like a basic school and not be able to play at Paul Boys, or you know what I'm saying, Paul West? It's difficult for them to be able to tap into their talent and go and play for South Africa?
That was my sense, at least certainly when I was doing research. I don't know, Sean, whether you were saying that it's changed significantly or not, but like I think that when I was following very closely, it would be like of the 22 or 23 players that were regularly featured, like they went to like 10 schools, right? You could rattle them off, like Parl Boys, Parl Him, Paul Ruiz.
It's funny what you, the reason I said that, just by the way, the reason I said that, we had another guest on, Hendrik Snyders, who's a rugby historian. I don't know if you've seen his work, but he had made the claim that the schools were actually the agent of political change in how we think of rugby in South Africa, both in terms of like aesthetically, like how you like the style, the relationships on the field have shifted, like seeing black players in positions that they weren't historically associated with. So like what is it? A prop, a hooker is now black. Like I've made this comment before. We went to see the Stormers play the Sharks around Christmas one, like very recently. This maybe 2 years ago at Newlands, and there were this tells you like how I was kind of, I live here now, right? Like you. So when you go to South Africa, you're like, hold up, rugby's different. So it was a prop forward, a set of the front line would come off, a hooker and two props, and three black players would go on, and you're like, what? How did that happen? So Hendrik Snyders' argument, and the reason I brought up about schools, was that schools had somehow, with no cost to the South African Rugby Union, had done that work. Like not just the work of like who's the playing personnel, but also of like what you thought who could play in certain kinds of positions, how they play, what it looked like, the feeling that you associated with it kind of changed in a way. And just one last point, he also pointed out that often some of the players that you see in the national team or in the super, what is it called, the URC or the Curry Cup and so on, they actually went to black schools now more and more. So, colored schools or black or African schools. So he pointed to Ricky January, I think, and Williams, I think Grant Williams. They both went to like this like colored high school, I think. Was it in Velterif or in Paarl? I forgot. But it's like his argument was that it's not just necessarily true anymore. Like because of what the school system had actually made some of these changes possible, both kind of like what you think is rugby and who you think should be leaders and how they play. Like the best player now is this kid in the youth, the under 21 section. He's from like the Boer Cup. I think he's a professional already, but Peak. Yeah, the scrum half. So it's like there's something is changing around who's playing, what kind of rugby are they playing, etc. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, one thing that I would say is, I don't know the methodology that this historian is using, but for me, the anthropological methodology is you hang out with people and you see how they experience things. You talk to them about their experiences. And one thing that I would say to add a little bit of complexity from my point of view is that, like, I talked to a lot of Black and colored players at very wealthy high schools who felt like they had been recruited only for rugby, that they felt alienated from their school experience, and sort of like, this is something that happens all over the place. They said basically, like, they feel like they had to carry themselves, they had to act in alignment with the school's perception of them and the school's values to have any hope of success. And so there was a real sense in my conversations with these kids that there was like kind of damage done to their sense of themselves, that like if they played creatively, if they took risks, if they acted like who they were, they would not get selected. They would in fact often get called in and like disciplined for it. And so like, yes, the schools, at least in my experience, were a valuable pathway for like players, like marginalized players, like socioeconomically, racially, into the higher levels of South African rugby. But there was a cost to that they had to play in an institutionally approved way. They sort of felt dehumanized in doing so. They couldn't be themselves, right? And that's one of the many ways that white supremacy can work, is sort of like, yeah, you can be involved and you can be successful in the system, but you have to sort of like give up a large component of who you are in order to do it, give up your willingness to resist in some important ways. And so I think that would be the kind of complexity that I would add based on my research and my conversations with folks to that narrative. Like, I have talked to too many people about like why they got into playing rugby, why they cheer for the teams that they cheer for, their experiences playing rugby, their rivalries that they have. Like it goes on and on. I like a lot of people, and this is a common thread that I heard, particularly among more conservative white South Africans, is like sports and politics shouldn't mix, right? That was something that was a story that people would tell during the apartheid era as well, right? Like, we're not
Which is so bizarre, because for them, sports and politics always mixed.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think I can't imagine a world where rugby, but then also any sport wasn't part of its political environment, and like not just mirroring that political environment, but changing it, right? Like when I watch these kids fight with each other on the field because the Afrikaner players want to play one way and the colored mixed race Black players want to play a different way, like that to me is politics happening. Those kids are not just arguing with each other. It's happening in real time. Yeah.
I think the best insight around this is the fact that sports and politics are intertwined is not shocking, right? That's part of the course. I think what I find useful about Joss's work is that's easy to establish, and then the next step is to get to this kind of complexity, and this this is now I'm gonna be like a nerd. The granular,
Exactly.
The detail. It's that little detail when you said like they're there, and you were like, this guy says to me, bro, I played for this team, and they never wanted to pass the ball to me.
Yeah.
And when they eventually passed the ball to me, I said, pass me the ball, and they passed it. And as I got the ball, two white guys came, and they like,
it was like a hospital pass, right? Yeah.
Just a hospital pass.
Yeah.
And then I have to think, was it that they just gave me the pass because I always ask for it, or did they set me up? So that's that part where it becomes, that's the interesting work, the interesting research. You have this new article that you've written, in which you've written about aesthetics, and now you're talking about, what is it?
Evocation.
Evocation.
Yeah.
So again, we're in the elevator.
Yeah.
In the elevator, you have to like explain that.
Yeah. So basically, this is a new project, so this is me workshopping it. A lot of scholars of art have argued that sports don't belong in that same conversation. And one of the things that they'll say is that when you make art, you're doing something creative and self-conscious. And when you're playing sports, you're just embedded in the activity. You're trying to accomplish a goal. And that's not what art is about. That's their conception. But what I'm trying to do is sort of talk about how when you watch a player play rugby, for example, this is one of my favorite examples, you'll see them do something on the field and you'll be like, oh, that reminds me of Elton Yankees. Like that reminds me of this player from 10 years ago. Like the way that they move, the way that they step, the way that they offload, like it's a Sonny Bill style offload or something like that. And so players in sports are communicating all the time, and artists communicate all the time. So this project is really about sort of like, rather than sort of saying like, are sports art or are they not, which is sort of where I was going initially in my book. It's more like, if we say that their sports and art kind of communicate in some way, they evoke feelings in us. What does that evoking? What happens on a sports field that makes you feel something, actually?
So just before just broadly, this is not you saying, okay, go sit in a gallery and watch a 90-minute film of Zidane.
No.
No, this is not that. Yeah, you're not, because that's still people trying to prove to you that this is art.
Yeah. It's about sort of like getting rid of the conversation of these two different activities, whether they're the same or whether they're different, and sort of say like, one of my favorite things is, I don't know if the two of you watch basketball, but Tyrese Halliburton for the Pacers hit a game winner against the Knicks, and then did the Reggie Miller thing, right? Yeah, and so like he's quoting, he's referencing, right? And like, it's not always that explicit. You can communicate by like not passing somebody the ball or passing them a hospital pass and then they get hit.
Again, I sort of like, so if I'm a fan and I'm like, okay, this would be different. I would say Hustle Yankees is referencing maybe Bola Conradi or somebody. And I'm like, Bola is the original art.
Yeah.
And now Yankees is the derivative. And even before Bola, maybe there was Peter de Villiers, even though I don't have any video. But just the visual images of Peter de Villiers might suggest that Tutti Alistair could see. So it's like, I have this, and I speak to like an older person who was at the Tutti game.
Yeah.
And they can actually say, when they'll say, Bola, that move by Bola, that was a Tutti move. So there's a memory of art there.
Yes, a memory
there's no proving, but there's art. There was
tradition, politics, all that stuff. Yes.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to me is your perspective on who's a good player, who isn't, has everything to do with the community you come from. A white Bulls friend from Pretoria will not know any of those players, right? Because they know the Bulls, they know the Springboks, they know
they read Rapport, and they read the Burger.
Exactly.
And they have a certain way of writing about rugby, and therefore that's what they think is rugby. Can I just say this? You're making me think of sort of like because even there's this kind of the Bola and the this and the that, but then there's also the people you interview, they also constructing, I don't know if it's like they telling you what the techniques are, like, like in the way of, again, we're not saying it's like a painting, but just the brush strokes and this, like these black players who are telling you like, if they could just give me a chance, I would have shown them this other tradition, this other kind of rugby that's there. Because we're now doing that when I watch rugby now, and Mani in the World Cup looks this way and kicks the other way.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I know he can do that. Why didn't they know he could? Why didn't they know he can do that? I knew he could do that.
Yeah.
And now they all are doing it. Every single fly half from any country you could think about is doing this like kick now.
Yeah. The core question for me was like, I interviewed some people who said that when they couldn't watch the Springboks, it wasn't that they weren't fans, they couldn't watch them because they
felt that was me.
They felt the violence of apartheid in their style. And so one of the ways that you can characterize kind of like my whole approach to sports is like, what's going on with that? Because it's not about the anthem's changed. It's not about the uniforms have changed. It's not even fully about demographics. The demographics are changing. It's like the way that they play makes me feel like it's apartheid again, Particularly an older generation would describe it that way. Getting to the heart of what that was all about and how sports make you feel things, the way that a painting can make you feel something or a concert can make you feel something, is what my research is kind of like going to explore.
Who's your favorite player? Firstly, of like the now, they don't have to be South African even. And then maybe also who's your favorite player like of all time?
Right now, I sort of have a soft spot for folks that I knew when I was doing my research. I don't think he's with the Boks right now, but Marvin Orie, like I knew him at the Bulls and I knew him when he was a junior. and he was transitioning into professionalism. And so like, I feel really, really fortunate that I can like watch these players and be like, oh, I knew you when you were small, you know?
I know this guy. He's played a few tests.
Yeah. But also just like to watch somebody play at the biggest stage that you knew when they were young and like timid and learning the game a little bit, like that's a really beautiful thing. Yeah.
An all-timer? Who's your all-timer?
Maybe Carlos Spencer, honestly. Just like, it was like the window of rugby when I was really learning the game, and like when he was playing for the Blues and like running from his own try line. It was like I loved his game. And I like Tana and Justin Marshall. Like I think.
Wait, you're actually, so you love the All Blacks?
I don't. These were the players who I idolized when I was younger, I think. But funny enough, maybe this takes us back to politics a little bit, but like, I like the Blitzbokke more than the Springboks. Branco de Pria and like Cecil Africa, like those guys. When people were like, what could South African rugby look like if not Mark Voss? I'd be like, look at the Blitzbokke. Big, expansive field, a lot of creative players of a range of backgrounds, right? Incredible speed, incredible hands, creativity. Harness that energy and make it core to how the Springboks play, and you would have like.
You know where you saw that at its best? And I used to replay that moment over and over again, was in the final against England in the World Cup in Japan, when and Mampimpi, did this and he kicks it and he catches, swings it out to Mampimpi, and Mampimpi scores. And then the celebration he does is a weird high step, almost like a sort of Deion Sanders, but not like, yo, like Deion Sanders. I saw a new documentary about the Dallas Cowboys where he says, I'm him, or I'm it. That's not Mampimpi. Mampimpi was more just like, it was a kind of a joy.
Yeah.
It was like a low high step behind the goal line. That is when I was like, that's what this rugby could be.
I know.
That's when I watch, and David remember this because I did say at that point, like, I think this is my team now.
Wow.
Because I saw like what Cheslin Colby did. I saw what, how Sia played. Like, I love this energy that they brought because they changed. Well, now the last couple of weeks, I'm kind of weirded out by this changing and going back to Mark Voss and the sort of like, I don't know, that looks like, as you said, that looks like I'm watching the blue biller. I'm watching the bold blow biller on television during apartheid and being like, what is this? This is not South Africa. Why are we winning with this?
To your point, like everything that you just said has nothing to do with jerseys, has nothing to do with anthems. It's like, what is this play meaning for me, right? What is it speaking to? What traditions is it connecting to? Does it feel alienating because it feels like a racist history, or does it feel like, oh, this is my team now? Like, that's what I think I'm really trying to do in my research. And one last thing, if I can add a thing, is during my research, like there was a black kid at a high school I did research with, who did a chip kick to himself and like broke play open. It was completely unplanned. And then at halftime, the coach was like, you're never doing that again. One of the things is like my research now is thinking about like, how do you go from being a player to being like a selfish player or like an unreliable player? And the way that you do that is the team has a structure and you take too many chances, right? And so like, of course, this kid would be read as like an unreliable, selfish player. He took a chance in a game that was not part of the script and it actually worked, but like, then he's like, oh my gosh, if I get read by my coach as a selfish player, he'll never play me and my career is done, And so it takes a lot, not just of like creativity, but also like guts and confidence to be like, every fiber of my being is telling me to not do this and just play within the structure, but that space is open. It's right there. I know I can do it. And then you break it open, That's a beautiful thing.
Hassan Peak for me. Hassan Peak is that kind of, he plays the under-21 team. They just won the Junior World Cup. And he does that. And there's also that very tall flanker whose name now escapes me. He looks like a lock forward, but he plays flank. Anyway, I don't know. We could go on and on with you. This was great, Josh. It was wonderful talking to you. If I'm up in
Yeah, you two are incredible. This was real.
If I'm around Maine again, I'll definitely stop by Colby and come say hi.
Great, please do.
If I'm at Hidden Valley.
All right.
Nice of
you,
bro.
I'm going to hopefully get back to South Africa soon, so maybe we can connect there too.
Definitely.